Welcome to the first episode of the Efficient Hunter and Steward of Nature podcast. Generally speaking, I want to focus on the skills required to hunt in the field, to prepare, hunt, or prepare for a season. But in this episode, I want to take a step back or step up and talk a little bit about the context for efficient hunting. I want to share my own blueprint for hunting plus, all the things I think are not just relevant but critical for me as a hunter. And I think they apply to you as well. As a matter of fact, I think they're relevant to all hunters. But why? I'll get back to. In summary, I'll share my own findings so far when trying to answer the question, what is hunting all about? Welcome to the Efficient Hunter and Steward of Nature podcast. Here you get tools to help you master the art of rifle hunting and inspiration to help you make hunting a force of good in nature. What I'm sharing is based on 30 years of hunting on 3 continents. And I've condensed the lessons learned based on the same tools I use to optimize processes for large multinational corporations. In summary, I packaged the lessons up as checklists and procedures that you can use to set yourself up for success when hunting. What is hunting all about? But why is that an important question to answer? Well, I think there's several reasons. Here are 3 critical reasons. One, there's the value. For me, hunting is not just a pastime, it's a lifestyle, which means I want to maximize the value I get from hunting. I want to enjoy hunting as much as possible. I want to make the most of my hunting time and budget. So I want to be clear about what really matters for me. Number 2 is sustainability. And I'm not just thinking about sustainability from a sort of environmental perspective. I'm thinking about sustainability as preserving hunting as a lifestyle. I'm sure you personally are aware of people who are against hunting, but you probably also know a lot of people who don't really have an opinion. And that leads us to the last point, which is responsibility. And I think as hunters, you and I have responsibility to serve as ambassadors for the lifestyle. I don't think we can necessarily convince all the diehard anti-hunters that hunting is a good thing, maybe a few of them. But I think there's a big group of people in the middle who don't really have a concept of what hunting is about, who's never been in contact with hunting, and they feed off, or they go by the stories they pick up in the media, and those stories are usually not that positive. So I think any hunter has a responsibility to try and educate the non-hunters. And I think, so I'll get back to, hunting is a force of good in nature. And that's an important message that we need to be able to share. That can be a challenge, which I'll also get back to in a sec. So in this episode specifically, I'll share my own blueprint. Let's call it my philosophical model for hunting, which includes 5 different roles that all hunters should consider in some shape or form, or to some degree. And I'll argue that if hunters act as stewards of nature, then hunting will be a force of good in nature. In this episode, I'm going to share a couple of quotes from a couple of books that were instrumental in helping me frame my model for hunting. One of the books is this one, Managing Our Wildlife Heritage by Ron Thompson. Another quote is from this book, which is The Unforeseen Wilderness, an essay on Kentucky's Red River Gorge by Wendell Berry. I'll also introduce you to the SAS Survival Handbook, talk about how that helped me discover Outdoorsmanship. And not the least, I'm going to talk about this one. You can see it if you're watching on YouTube, but what I'm showing you now is the ATA Jungle King 2 Survival Knife. More on that later. My background as a hunter is that I've hunted for about 30 years now, on 3 continents, and I'm a certified gear freak. And my focus has always been on new flashy gear and adventures that hunting gave me. And until a few years ago, I never really reflected on the deeper meaning of hunting or my wider role as a hunter, my responsibility as a hunter. 3 things made me reflect more on hunting, or reflect deeper on hunting. The first thing was having to explain hunting to non-hunters, which I mentioned earlier. People often associate hunting with just the act of hunting, and usually on the cruelty of killing an animal. And it can be difficult to put that into a non-emotional context, but it can also be difficult to summarize all the things we enjoy as hunters. I'm sure you personally enjoy lots of different facets of hunting. Having an overall label that describes that well, and having a simple structure to help people break that label down, I've always found really challenging, which is one of the things I'm going to address in this episode. The other thing that made me reflect is being involved in commercial shooting for wildlife management and for harvesting venison for game dealers. That's an absolutely critical activity in the countryside for several reasons, but it's also one that made me reflect on what I really value about hunting in a wider sense, and what I want to focus on for hunting to be fulfilling, but also what I want to make sure I focus on to be that ambassador to hunting that I mentioned earlier. And the final thing that helped me reflect was building hunting gear for my company Red Kettle, where the focus is on ultra functional gear and solving specific problems to make hunters more efficient. But in that context, I still wanted an overall model that answered the bigger why hunting. And I wanted to make sure that I had a clear idea about what the purpose of efficient hunting was, efficient gear. Because I didn't want to just create efficiencies for the sake of efficiencies. I wanted the efficiencies to help hunters serve a purpose. It wasn't like those things just popped up on a single day, but they definitely over time set me on to a journey of discovery. So what did I do? I did what I always do. I started looking for patterns. I started asking questions. On one hand, I was trying to visualize a flow of hunting from not just being out hunting, finding a deer, shooting a deer, etc., but the entire flow of hunting, understanding what deer you wanted to shoot, all the way to being able to serve wild meat to your friends and your family. I also wanted to get a better idea of what I enjoyed as a hunter, or enjoy as a hunter. As I said, there's a few things that served as a catalyst to make me reflect about what I enjoyed, and that made me spend some time thinking about all the great moments I had hunting and what I valued about them. And as I said, not just hunting in a narrow context, but hunting in the broadest sense. So what was the result? Well, the result so far is that I've condensed hunting into, let's call it an archetype hunter that I refer to as a steward of nature. And that steward of nature comes with 5 different roles. There's a conservationist, there's the adventurer, there's the outdoorsman, there's a cook, and there's a hunter. And the hunter is the efficient hunter. But let's look at those 5 roles one by one. The conservationist. So here's the problem with conservation, well, at least my own problem with conservation. At a basic level, I understood what conservation meant. But if I started thinking about all the details, I found it very challenging to find the data to tell me what the right thing to do was. And also I struggled with figuring out exactly how I could do my part. So what's right and how do I chip in? And there was one thing that sort of nagged me a little bit. And that was a question if hunting really goes against conservation. I didn't think so, but I didn't really have any good arguments or insight to say otherwise, or to tell me that hunting is conservation, which I'll get back to. One of the things that helped me shape a picture of what conservation means to me, and I'd argue to you, was this quote by a guy called Wendell Berry. It's from the book I mentioned earlier, The Unforeseen Wilderness, an essay on Kentucky's Wild or Red River Gorge. Here's what Wendell Berry has to say. But there is another form that life can take. We can learn about it from exceptional people of our own culture and from other cultures less destructive than ours. I'm speaking of the life of a man who knows that the world is not given by his fathers, but borrowed from his children, who has undertaken to cherish it and do it no damage, not because he's duty-bound, but because he loves the world and he loves his children. I think that's beautifully simple, and as much as the quote doesn't give me all the answers, it serves as a North Star to guide me when I think about how I am a conservationist, or what I can do for conservation. There's a couple of other sources of influence and data points that have helped me develop my picture of conservation and hunting and conservation. One is Ron Thompson and his book Managing Our Wildlife Heritage, where he talks about conservation and, more importantly, where he talks about symbiosis between human nature and animals, which I'll get back to later in the episode. There's also a very interesting article from the International Institute for Environment and Development. It's named The Baby and the Bathwater: Trophy Hunting, Conservation and Rural Livelihoods. Without drilling too far into the article, I want to highlight the key point, which is that when done right, hunting is conservation. So what do I do to be a conservationist? Well, I support rural economies and local conservation efforts by hunting abroad. What an excuse. Also work hard on our own little plot of land to further not just the population of deer, but everything from the soil to plants to animals. It's just a small contribution, and I'm learning a lot, but it's very tangible, very specific and very practical, and I enjoy that kind of direct involvement. At Red Kettle we also support Blood Origins, which is kind of it gives us a leverage to support bigger and more global initiatives. Okay, let's look at the next role, the adventurer. So what was my problem with adventure, or how did I discover the adventurer? I was part of a commercial deer management outfit, which I mentioned earlier was or is an extremely important part of conservation and wildlife management and rural livelihoods. But it's also a more mechanical and numbers-based approach to hunting. And as much as I loved having access to as much hunting as I had time for, it also made me reflect on how I spent that time. In essence, I focused on supporting the cull numbers, but I forgot to put time away for the big and small adventures. The three things that, again, over time prompted me to reflect on this. One thing was conversations with my good friend Fizz around having time for those little moments, like just a coffee in the woods, enjoying the beauty of nature instead of just rushing home afterwards or after a hunt. I've also had many great campfire cooking conversations with my good friend Matt Moss, who continues to give me great insight on conservation and wildlife management but we also share a passion for those adventures, even if it just means starting a fire and putting a bit of venison on the grill to enjoy a simple, beautiful meal. And the last thing I wanted to point out was doing a survival course, a children's survival course with my oldest son. And it was just pure beauty and 110% joy watching him in the woods, taking pleasure from what I thought was fairly basic tasks, just setting up a shelter, lighting a fire. And that kind of childish excitement, to me, is the essence of the adventurer, and one we should preserve. And it was a real prompt and a real reminder to understand what adventures meant. Upon reflection, I think the adventures aren't just about the value you derive from hunting. It's not just about fun. I think it's a first step as a steward of nature to really connect with the great outdoors, and seeing the beauty not just in the big adventures but also the small adventures is an important part of connecting with nature. The fact that it's a ton of fun is just an added benefit. Today there's a particular item I use as a prompt or reminder for the importance of adventure. It's also a prompt for the Outdoorsman, but let's just focus on the adventurer for now. When I first acquired this item was way back. I think I must have been around 11, 12 years old. My family and I were in Spain, I believe, on a regular summer holiday. And my parents told me I could buy a souvenir, probably thinking that I'd buy, I don't know, diving mask and some fins or something normal. Of course, they should have known better. As we were walking around the little charming Spanish streets, I clocked something. Not a regular souvenir shop. What I clocked was one of those typical Southern European knife shops. The ones that have everything from katanas to butterfly knives, slingshots, what have you. And there was definitely all that hardware in the window. But being a child of the Rambo era, I zoomed in on one particular item in that big window. The most beautiful survival knife my 11-year-old eyes had ever seen. It was an instant feeling of excitement, and my little brain started processing how to pitch that survival knife as my souvenir. Granted, it was fairly different from a football, and I'm not sure how I did, but I managed to convince my parents that that was the right thing to buy. I can still smell the knife. The first version I got must have gotten lost in a move sometime. But the beauty of the internet is that as I started reflecting on hunting, I managed to find a company in Spain where I could actually buy this thing of beauty. Not because it's something I'd use today, but more as that adventurer North Star. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. I'll put a picture of the knife in the episode page that I'll link to in the description. Let me just explain what this knife is about. So it's got a black metal handle and a green polymer sheath, and its sheath is wrapped in paracord, and behind the paracord on the back is a sharpening stone. The blade curves a little bit outwards at the point, and it's got a serrated back. The black handle has little holes, so you can use a stick inside the hollow grip to turn it into a spear, which of course is something we all need. And being a child of the Rambo era, the hollow grip or handle with a compass was just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. And inside that hollow handle was also a little survival capsule with, I believe, like a band-aid, and there's some fishing gear in here. I think in the original one there was actually a kind of some painkillers as well. Gonna screw the cap back on the handle and then proceed to the sheath. And inside the sheath, an extra little knife, including a tin opener and a bottle opener, so you can have your spam and your beer when you're in a real survival situation. It also includes a signaling mirror, complete with instructions on how to use it. I just want to wrap up the adventure by saying that, to me, I think it's important to remember that you have big adventures and small adventures. Big adventures is like driving in an open top Land Cruiser through Central African bush on the way to a buffalo hunt. Massive adventure. But I also think that the small adventures are critical, and perhaps they're more important because they are the everyday adventures. That means we continue to connect with nature. To me, those little adventures are everything from just sitting down, enjoying a coffee in the woods after a hunt, or even just sitting down to pause, taking it all in before a hunt. It's watching a mouse scuffle around you up close because you're still in your position waiting for a deer. And there's all those campfire moments that I think are totally underrated. So outdoorsmanship. When I got that beautiful ATA Jungle King 2 survival knife, I spent a lot of time looking at all the features, and slowly my excitement subsided, or that was replaced by a realization that it actually took a fair level of skill to put those features to good use. And I realized that, not then but now, that outdoorsmanship is kind of the flip side of adventure. For adventures, for hunting for that matter, outdoorsmanship is that logistical foundation that allow you to go out and back and operate in the field. As a kid, after Jungle King 2, the step or the thing that connected all those exciting features with actual skills that set me on a path to developing those skills was one particular book. See SAS Survival Handbook by Lofty Wiseman. Lofty Wiseman, or John Wiseman, was, I believe, the senior instructor in survival skills for the Special Air Service, or the SAS. And in that book, he's captured all the essential survival skills: fire, water, food, shelter, with some beautiful drawings and based on a ton of practical knowledge. And it's really what set me off on that path. It's not conclusive, but it's kind of the framework that has helped me jump out and do deep dives in specific rabbit holes inside of the outdoorsman skills category, if you will. As I said, outdoorsmanship is a critical element in any successful hunting trip. Certainly the further away you go and the longer you're out. And as such, it's a real gear rabbit hole. But I think there's a particular quote from a famous bushcraft authority that is worthwhile remembering for outdoorsmanship. The guy's called Morse Kochanski. He's famous for being a true resource. What he says, or one of the things he said was, the more you know, the less you carry. And I think that's a beautiful, simple statement to help you balance out the desire to buy new and shiny gear. Okay, let's jump to the cook. Cooking is just the output of hunting, isn't it? Quote unquote, just serving food for your friends and family. Actually, I think it's much more than that. Harvesting wild food, serving it for my family, is definitely a big thing about hunting. And it goes into conservation or sustainability in terms of what I eat. But I think there's a more fundamental reason for remembering or including the cook as a critical role when you're acting as a steward of nature. Because I think it ties everything together and it unlocks stewardship, and it adds the last piece of that engagement with nature I talked about, or first mentioned when discussing adventure and the role of the adventurer. Again, there was a particular quote that helped me shape my view or help things click for me. I mentioned Ron Thompson and his book, Managing Our Wildlife Heritage. And here's the particular quote from that book. Highly recommended, by the way. I'll link to it in the description. Anyway, let's see what Ron Thompson said. Living in a state of symbiosis means that man and the natural world both gain survival benefits when man consumptively uses wild animal and or wild plant resources on a sustainable basis. The natural world gains survival benefits because man cannot then afford to see the wildlife resources that his own survival depends on disappear. As a lot of assumptions, including using things on a sustainable basis, and things might not be as simple as that, but I think the mechanics of this concept are valid. And I think as a hunter, it's an important concept to remember, but it's also an important story to tell when we act as ambassadors for hunting and for nature. I'm sure you know the difference between buying a steak at the grocery store and eating it versus hunting maybe for several days, maybe seeing a deer and missing an opportunity to shoot for whatever reason, and then finally getting the deer, and then struggling through the snow in the rain to get that deer back home, butchering it, and then cooking it. There's a million times greater appreciation for the food you then serve compared to something you just grab from a shelf. So in that regard, hunting is the same as fishing or gardening, activities where you gather or harvest your food yourself, develop as much greater appreciation for those resources, and probably, I will argue, make you less likely to waste them. And I think the argument from Ron Thompson that the dependency is such a critical one, the symbiosis between man and nature, is one that we experience as hunters because we harvest our food in the wild. It's just a reminder that this is my philosophical approach to hunting. The podcast in the future episodes will be more about the efficient hunter that we'll get to in a second, and more about the skills and the knowledge and the gear that you need to be able to master to be an efficient hunter, and how you can become more efficient. Steward of Nature and the 5 roles gives us that context that we need for a balanced approach to hunting. And if these ideas resonate with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share the podcast with a fellow hunter. Okay, let's examine the role of the efficient hunter. Why do I refer to this role as efficient hunter and not just the hunter? One, because the hunter has a role to play when it comes to stewardship of nature. The hunter implements the conservationist conservation plans, and the hunter harvests wild food for the cook to be able to create the symbiosis between mankind and nature. And in that respect, hunting is about a job well done. There's plenty of time for fun and adventure, but in this perspective on hunting, we set that aside when we talk about the act of hunting. And from a not selfish but practical approach, to me, when I do go hunting, when I have set time aside for the adventures and for the appreciation for nature, I also want to make the most of my hunting time. I want to make the time in the woods worthwhile, and I also want to make sure that I make the most of my hunting budget. That's a practical perspective, but maybe you're like me and maybe you recognize this feeling. I also don't want to come home empty-handed from a hunt. It's happened, for sure, and I always have a good reason, but I hate having to explain why. And finally, on a personal level, and again maybe that resonates with you, I just have some kind of obsession with optimizing my gear and the way I use it. I take great pleasure in asking why, and how. I want to understand each step in the process, and if it has a role to play, and if it doesn't have a role, then let's get rid of it. Which leads me to efficient. Efficient means doing something with as little wasted effort and time. It means doing things right. And that's what I focus on when I talk about efficient hunting. But the foundation, a critical foundation for efficiency, is effectiveness. And effectiveness is doing the right things. I think it's Peter Drucker, the management guru, who said something to the effect of, there is nothing as useless as doing with perfection things that should not be done. So effectiveness and efficiency go hand in hand when we talk efficient hunting. And for the Steward of Nature, for this concept, my efficiency toolbox is one I learned when I first started working for General Electric, my first job after business school. The program I was on at GE, there was a requirement for us to be certified as Lean Six Sigma Green Belts. And in particular, the lean principles are ones I think are not just relevant to corporations. For sure, they helped Toyota become the biggest car manufacturer in the world. But I think we can also apply them to hunting without going totally overboard. Some of the relevant principles I use are define value, reduce waste, create flow, and continue to improve. Plus a lot of tools to implement those principles, which I'll get back to. And I combine those concepts with my back catalogue of things I've done wrong when hunting. Also things I've done right. But for sure I have enough mistakes to make me reflect and put things into context. And it's the essence of all that I want to share with you in all these episodes in this podcast. A concept I continue to refine. So in some way, I'm inviting you on a journey, on my journey to try to master hunting. And on the way, I hope that the ideas will help you on your own journey to master hunting. So in addition to lessons learned, I want to share some specific elements that I have been developing, that I am developing, including a 4-step process to building up to a hunting season, a 6-step process complete with procedures to guide you on any hunt, and a 7-question process to help you plan a hunt to any destination, including selection of gear, figuring out how to use it. This is a model that ties together both the hunting and the outdoorsmanship. All right, let's just zoom back out. We covered the 5 roles of the Steward of Nature: the Conservationist, the Adventurer, the Outdoorsman, the Cook, and the Hunter. And in summary, these roles help me explain what hunting is all about. Rifle hunting, deer hunting, hunting hooved animals. And as a model, the Steward of Nature and the 5 roles also give me specific labels to explain hunting to non-hunters. As I said, I think the Steward of Nature is a better label. And I strongly believe that hunting and the symbiosis that hunting creates between humans and nature makes hunters true stakeholders in nature. Many people, most people are apart from nature. They look in, they watch David Attenborough on the TV, they watch a documentary, but it's apart from nature. You're not engaging, you don't have a stake in nature if you just look in. And I think the important part about hunting, when done right, is that we rely on hunting for food, which creates a stakeholdership. So you and me as hunters, we are stakeholders, and which means we should also be ambassadors, which means we should also remember to do the right things. And I hope that the Steward of Nature model gives you a framework to consider what the right things are. But what about trophy hunting? When I talk to non-hunters, even some hunters, the conversation often leads to trophy hunting, killing Cecil the lion. I think mainly trophy hunting, legacy of times gone by, and negative press. And are two arguments, two ideas or concepts I share when I'm faced with the question about trophy hunting from non-hunters, and even from people who do hunt. One is, I mentioned our friends at the International Institute for Environment and Development. They're folks who are, if not the driving force, and deeply involved in figuring out if a species is endangered or not. And as much as some of them don't see any real appeal in trophy hunting, and when I say trophy hunting, I mean anyone who goes somewhere and pays to shoot an animal, they have a very pragmatic and very positive view on that concept as a mechanism for conservation and sustainability. I mentioned the article, The Baby and the Bathwater, Trophy Hunting, Conservation and Rural Livelihoods. And as I said, in that article, they argue that hunters, foreign or domestic, who participate in that type of hunting, bring resources to local conservation efforts, bring resources to local businesses, and they increase meat value. Instead of having a kilo of meat that's bushmeat or pound of meat that's bushmeat, suddenly there's a whole different price and much more value to be gained when that animal is hunted sustainably. Lots of assumptions, lots of things that could go wrong, but as a mechanism, hunting abroad, trophy hunting, is a way to further conservation. So hunting is conservation when done right. It's one thing. The other thing I refer to as the Eiffel Tower argument. So imagine you're going on a holiday to Paris. You don't go to Paris to buy a plastic model of the Eiffel Tower. You go to Paris to enjoy the food, the culture, the sights and the sounds. And when you're there, you might buy that plastic model of the Eiffel Tower and you bring it back and it reminds you of a wonderful holiday. Same thing with trophy hunting. You, I'm sure, like me, don't go abroad to hunt to bring home a pair of antlers or a set of horns. Go there for the things I mentioned, for the 5 roles Steward of Nature, for the adventure, to take part in conservation, to use my outdoorsman skills, to enjoy nature, and for the pleasure of hunting. We don't hunt for trophies. We hunt for the wider experience as stewards of nature. And a trophy reminds me, I'm sure reminds you, reminds us of that experience. Okay, there was a long way around the Steward of Nature, the 5 roles, plus a little side note on trophy hunting. I hope I've given you some food for thought. Maybe some of the concepts I've shared resonate with you. Maybe all of them. Maybe you have different opinions. But at least I hope you'll reflect on what I've said. And because I believe in these things, I hope you will work to be a steward of nature. And remember, being a steward of nature includes having a ton of fun. It's an excuse for diving down a couple of gear rabbit holes. It's an excuse for sitting down, enjoying beautiful sunset, the sounds of the woods, and for cooking wild meat. So what's not to like about this concept? As I said earlier, if these ideas resonate with you, please share them with other hunters, or share the podcast with other hunters so we can spread the word. And together, you and I can help sustain hunting as a lifestyle and make sure that hunting is a force of good in nature. So as I said, this is my philosophical blueprint for hunting. In future episodes, we're going to look at the efficient hunter in more detail. we're going to go down the rabbit hole of skills and gear, tools, tactics and techniques. If you're new to hunting, I give you a ton of tips and a ton of things to learn, a structure and step-by-step approach. If you're a seasoned hand, I'm sure, or it's my intention or my hope, that you'll find a great deal of inspiration so you can tweak your own framework and use it as a mirror to consider how you do things. In the coming episodes, I'm going to cover the hunter's field accuracy test, dealing with the big lie that we all tell ourselves. I've certainly done it. I don't know about you. I'm going to share lessons learned, a hunting story about missing an ibex in Kazakhstan, and I'm going to introduce the hunting process and the procedures that gives you checks for each phase of your hunt to make sure you do the right thing. On a practical note, I'll link to all these resources in the description. I'm also going to link to the episode page where you can find a transcript of the episode, links to the gear we built at Red Kettle, and not the least, courses with more in-depth detail on all the checks, procedures, skills and techniques that I'm talking about in these podcasts. Thanks for listening.